Welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting into one of Five Nights at Freddy's most enduring mysteries, a question that has haunted the community since the very beginning and remains, even now, frustratingly, without a definitive answer. Golden Freddy. That slumped, eyeless figure materializing in your office with a scream that crashes the game. The ghostly apparition that defies the rules every other animatronic follows. Behind that hollow suit lies a story, or perhaps two stories, tangled together in ways that challenge everything we think we understand about possession, memory, and the nature of souls in this haunted universe. This is the question that keeps theorists awake at night, the debate that splits the community down the middle, the mystery that Scott Cawthon may have intentionally left unsolved. Does one spirit haunt Golden Freddy, or do two souls share that tattered golden shell? Is it Cassidy alone, the vengeful spirit who refuses to let go? Or does the crying child, the boy whose birthday ended in tragedy, share that prison with her? Perhaps the answer is both. Perhaps it's neither. Perhaps the truth is something we haven't even considered yet. Whether you're here to examine the evidence with fresh eyes, revisiting familiar theories that still spark debate, or simply letting these questions wash over you like a gentle fog as you drift toward sleep, this journey will take you through every angle of Golden Freddy's identity. We'll walk through the Survival Logbook's cryptic messages, decode Ultimate Custom Night's vengeful whispers, examine the Stitchwraith parallel from Fazbear Frights, and weigh the evidence on both sides of this divide. Before we begin, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if you enjoy this kind of deep dive into FNAF's most persistent mysteries. And let me know in the comments where you stand on this question. Team One Soul or Team Two Souls? It's always fascinating to see how the community remains so deeply divided on this single question after all these years. Let's begin. In the dim glow of a cathode ray monitor, back when Five Nights at Freddy's first emerged in 2014, players quickly learned that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza held secrets beyond the obvious animatronic threats prowling the halls. 4 main animatronics hunted you through the cameras: Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, each following patterns you could learn, behaviors you could predict, rules you could master. Then there was Golden Freddy. He didn't move through the cameras. He didn't shamble down hallways or peek through doorways. One moment, your office was empty. The next, he was there, slumped against the wall, a broken marionette of golden fur and hollow eyes, defying every rule the game had established. His appearance crashed your game, a meta violation that suggested something was different about this entity. While other animatronics seemed driven by programming, by remnant animating dead machinery, Golden Freddy felt like a glitch in reality itself, a ghost that shouldn't exist within the game's framework. The phrase, "It's me," appeared in his presence. Those 2 words flickering on posters, materializing in hallways, a message that felt personal rather than mechanical. Who was this presence trying to communicate with? What did "It's me" mean? Was it a threat, a plea, or simply a spirit trying to identify itself? As the franchise expanded, Golden Freddy's mystery only deepened. In Five Nights at Freddy's 2, he appeared as a crumpled heap in the office. No endoskeleton visible, just fabric and form, more spectral than physical. In Five Nights at Freddy's 3, the Happiest Day minigame showed 6 children receiving their final rest, with the child at the table donning a Golden Freddy mask, before all the spirits ascended together. That child seemed special, seated alone while the others gathered on one side, given their cake last in a ceremony orchestrated by the puppet herself. The imagery suggested completion, a final piece falling into place. But who was this child? Was it one of the 5 missing children from the incident that started everything? Or was it someone else entirely? Someone whose story predated even those murders? The community quickly recognized that Golden Freddy was fundamentally different from other possessed animatronics. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy were physical suits stuffed with the bodies of murdered children, remnant fusing soul to metal in a grotesque marriage of life and death. Golden Freddy had no consistent physical form. He materialized and dematerialized, appeared without traveling, existed in states that suggested he was more apparition than animatronic. This distinction raised questions about the nature of his possession. Was Golden Freddy's spirit bound to a physical suit that simply lacked an endoskeleton? Or was he a pure manifestation of soul energy, unbound by the physical limitations that constrained the other children's spirits? The answer to this question would prove crucial in understanding who haunted him and why. As years passed and more games released, evidence accumulated on multiple fronts. The Survival Logbook introduced cryptic codes spelling out names. Ultimate Custom Night presented a vengeful spirit with ambiguous gender keeping William Afton in eternal torment. Fazbear Frights books showed 2 children sharing a single animatronic body in the Stitchwraith. Help Wanted. 2 offered memory dolls that seemed to confirm certain children's identities. Each piece of evidence pointed somewhere, but the complete picture remained frustratingly unclear. Some evidence suggested one soul haunted Golden Freddy. Other evidence strongly implied 2 spirits shared that vessel. The most maddening part? Both interpretations had substantial support from canon sources. This wasn't a case of one theory being obviously correct and the other obviously wrong. This was a genuine ambiguity, a question that Scott Cawthon seemed to have deliberately left open to interpretation. The debate centers on 2 primary candidates: Cassidy, one of the 5 children murdered in the missing children incident, whose name was revealed through puzzle solving and confirmed through various sources, and the crying child, the young boy from 5 Nights at Freddy's 4, whose birthday party ended with his head crushed in the Fredbear's jaws, the victim of the bite of 83. Evidence ties both children to Golden Freddy in different ways. Cassidy's connection comes through explicit naming, through her role as the vengeful spirit, through her appearance in the Happiest Day minigame. The crying child's connection comes through his death in a golden bear suit, through his constant association with Fredbear throughout FNAF 4, through promises that someone would put him back together. Could both connections be true? Could Golden Freddy be a shared vessel? 2 children bound together by tragedy and circumstance? Or must one interpretation be correct and the other wrong? This question matters beyond simple curiosity. Understanding Golden Freddy's identity helps unlock broader questions about FNAF's lore. It informs our understanding of how possession works in this universe, whether multiple souls can inhabit a single animatronic, what happens to spirits when physical vessels are destroyed, how memory and identity persist beyond death. It affects our interpretation of other major story beats. The Happiest Day minigame, Ultimate Custom Night, the fate of various spirits after the pizzeria simulator fire. All of these moments take on different meanings depending on who haunts Golden Freddy. If Cassidy alone possesses him, then certain story threads resolve cleanly. If both Cassidy and the crying child share him, then the narrative becomes more complex, more layered, but also potentially more meaningful. If neither theory is quite right, If the truth is something we haven't fully grasped yet, then we're still missing fundamental pieces of how this universe operates. What makes this mystery particularly fascinating is how it resists simple resolution. Unlike some FNAF debates, where one side clearly has more evidence, the Golden Freddy question presents genuinely compelling arguments on both sides. You can't dismiss either interpretation as simply being wrong or based on misunderstanding. Both the one soul and two souls theories are built on solid canonical evidence, supported by thoughtful analysis and defended by significant portions of the community. This isn't a debate between truth and falsehood. It's a debate between two plausible interpretations of intentionally ambiguous evidence. Perhaps that ambiguity is the point. Perhaps Scott Cawthon designed this mystery to remain unresolved, to spark eternal debate, to let players decide for themselves what they believe. Or perhaps future releases will finally provide the definitive answer everyone seeks. For now, though, we exist in this state of uncertainty, weighing evidence that points in multiple directions, trying to solve a puzzle that may not have a single correct solution. So tonight, we'll examine this question from every angle. We'll explore Cassidy's identity and her connection to Golden Freddy. We'll trace the crying child's story and understand why so many believe he haunts that suit. We'll decode the Survival Logbook's cryptic messages, analyze Ultimate Custom Night's implications, examine the Stitchwraith parallel from Fazbear Frights, and weigh the evidence supporting both one soul and two souls. By the end, you'll have all the information needed to form your own conclusion about who truly haunts Golden Freddy. The answer, as with so much in Five Nights at Freddy's, may ultimately depend on which evidence you find most compelling, which interpretation resonates most with your understanding of how this universe works. Let's begin with the most explicitly named candidate, the spirit whose identity seems most certain, even as her role in the story raises its own questions. Let's talk about Cassidy. The name Cassidy first emerged from one of FNAF's most elaborate puzzles, hidden within the pages of the Survival Logbook, a tie-in book released between Pizzeria Simulator and Ultimate Custom Night that presented itself as a security guard's journal filled with routine questions and casual prompts. But beneath that mundane surface, something else lurked. Strange text appeared in faded grey, asking questions that seemed directed at someone beyond the book's intended reader. Other text was altered. Printed words changed to different messages, as if someone was editing reality itself. And scattered throughout certain pages, the phrase, "my name," appeared in that same ghostly text, directing attention to something hidden. Players quickly recognized this as a puzzle. The altered page numbers weren't random errors. They were coordinates pointing to specific letters in a word search elsewhere in the book. When you followed those coordinates, collecting the indicated letters in order, they spelled out a name: C-A-S-S-I-D-Y. 9 letters that seemed to answer one of the franchise's biggest questions. Finally, after years of speculation, one of the missing children had a confirmed name beyond the simple identifiers from the source code. Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and now Cassidy. The 5th child's identity was revealed. But who exactly was Cassidy, and which animatronic did she possess? The evidence pointed strongly toward Golden Freddy. The word search puzzle that spelled her name appeared on a page dominated by Golden Freddy imagery. The phrase, "it's me," so closely associated with Golden Freddy's appearances throughout the franchise, appeared repeatedly near references to Cassidy. The book seemed to be drawing a direct connection between this name and that golden apparition. Further confirmation came from other sources. The Fourth Closet, one of the novel trilogy books, featured a character named Cassidy, described as a young girl with long black hair. While the novels exist in an alternate continuity with different specifics, character names often carry over between continuities, and this Cassidy was explicitly connected to Golden Freddy in that story's context. The Survival Logbook even included an illustration showing the puppet presenting a birthday cake to a dark-haired girl, positioned similarly to the child receiving cake in the Happiest Day minigame, the child who dons the Golden Freddy mask before ascending with the others. The gravestone ending from Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator provided additional evidence. After completing the game's true ending and releasing the spirits to their rest, players who achieved a specific completion percentage were shown a cemetery scene with 6 gravestones visible. 5 names were clearly readable: Gabriel, Fritz, Susie, Jeremy, and 1 gravestone partially obscured by grass. Based on the Survival Logbook puzzle solving, the community concluded that hidden name was Cassidy, the 5th missing children incident victim. This interpretation made sense. 5 children were murdered and stuffed into the classic animatronics. Gabriel possessed Freddy, Jeremy possessed Bonnie, Susie possessed Chica, Fritz possessed Foxy, and Cassidy possessed Golden Freddy. A clean, symmetrical assignment that accounted for all 5 victims and all 5 possessed suits. The 6th gravestone, standing apart from the others on a hill, bore no name but was widely understood to be Charlotte Emily, the puppet, whose story preceded and enabled the others' possessions. Cassidy's characterization emerged most fully in Ultimate Custom Night, the game that seemed designed specifically to explore the vengeful spirit's torment of William Afton. Though never explicitly named in that game, various animatronics reference the one you should not have killed, a spirit keeping Afton trapped in a nightmare prison of his own memories and crimes. The mediocre melodies, when they attack, feature a second voice layered beneath their own dialogue, whispered words that convey the vengeful spirit's determination to ensure Afton never escapes, never dies, never finds release from his suffering. These whispers are widely attributed to Cassidy, the spirit with the strongest claim to the one you should not have killed title based on her actions throughout the series. Golden Freddy's behavior in Ultimate Custom Night reinforces this connection. If you set his difficulty to 1 and use a death coin on him, Fredbear immediately jump scares you, suggesting you've attempted to kill the very entity orchestrating this torment, the one who cannot be killed because she is, by definition, the one you should not have killed. The game's final cutscene, triggered by achieving a score of 9,800 points, shows Golden Freddy's form twitching and jerking in the darkness before slowly fading away. This imagery suggests a spirit in turmoil, unable or unwilling to let go despite the punishment this eternal vigil extracts. The Old Man Consequences minigame, accessed through a secret drowning sequence, features a red bear presumably representing this vengeful spirit being counseled by a fisherman figure to leave the demon to his demons and rest your own soul. The implication is clear. This spirit, this entity keeping Afton trapped in torment, needs to let go and move on. But they refuse. Their hatred, their need for vengeance, their determination that Afton continue suffering supersedes any desire for their own peace. This characterization fits what we understand about Cassidy from other sources. She isn't just any victim. She's the one with the strongest, most personal grievance. The one whose anger burns so bright it can construct and maintain an entire nightmare dimension designed solely to torture her killer. The Man in Room 1280, a Fazbear Fright story, provides additional context for understanding Cassidy's role, though the exact relationship between book continuity and game continuity remains debated. In that story, Andrew, a young boy, keeps William Afton alive but in a comatose state, trapped in a hospital bed, unable to die despite horrific burns and injuries. Andrew's soul has attached itself to Afton's, preventing him from dying, keeping him conscious enough to experience suffering, but not alert enough to escape. This mirrors Ultimate Custom Night's setup remarkably well. A spirit keeping Afton trapped in torment, unable to die, forced to experience nightmare scenarios repeatedly. If we accept Fazbear Frights as providing parallels or explanations for game events, as Scott Cawthon suggested the book sometimes would, then Andrew might represent Cassidy's role in the games. Both are victims of Afton keeping him imprisoned in a state between life and death. Both refuse to let go. Both prioritize his suffering over their own release. But here's where Cassidy's story gets complicated. If she alone possesses Golden Freddy, if she is the soul spirit haunting that suit, then certain aspects of the lore snap into focus, while others become more puzzling. The Happiest Day. Minigame makes sense as her receiving closure, finally letting go of her need for vengeance and ascending with the other children. Her role in Ultimate Custom Night explains why that game happened after the pizzeria simulator fire. Even when the physical animatronics burned, even when Henry Emily's plan succeeded in releasing most spirits, Cassidy remained, her attachment to Afton superseding any attempt to free her. She created the nightmare realm of Ultimate Custom Night, populated it with manifestations of every threat Afton had ever created or encountered, and forced him to relive his crimes eternally. Only after this torment, perhaps after the Old Man Consequences intervention, did she finally let go, finally allow both herself and Afton to move beyond their destructive bond. This reading is clean, thematically satisfying, and well supported by explicit evidence from multiple games and books. However, this interpretation struggles to account for certain other pieces of evidence. The Survival Logbook doesn't just reveal Cassidy's name. It also contains an apparent conversation between two entities, one using faded text to ask questions, another using altered text to respond. If Cassidy is the only spirit in Golden Freddy, who is she talking to? Why are questions being asked about memories, about fear, about being unable to see, if only one spirit inhabits that suit? The one soul interpretation must explain away this conversation as either not taking place within Golden Freddy, or as Cassidy communicating with someone else entirely, perhaps Michael Afton, who owned the logbook, or perhaps the crying child located somewhere else. But the most straightforward reading of that evidence suggests two spirits in communication, two entities sharing space and trying to understand each other. This reading implies Golden Freddy isn't possessed by Cassidy alone. It's possessed by Cassidy and someone else. Someone who can't see. Someone who's scared. Someone with different memories than Cassidy. Different experiences, different responses to the questions being asked. The gender ambiguity in Ultimate Custom Night also creates complications for Cassidy being the sole tormentor. The voice casting for the one you should not have killed explicitly requested ambiguity, a voice that could be either a young boy or young girl, with the gender not being immediately clear. Withered, Chica, and Mangle both refer to this entity using male pronouns, saying he when discussing the one controlling Ultimate Custom Night's nightmare. Yet Cassidy is consistently characterized as female in sources like the Fourth Closet novel, and the Survival Logbook's illustration. This mismatch has multiple possible explanations. Perhaps the animatronics are referring to the Golden Freddy suit itself, using its masculine designation rather than the spirit's gender. Perhaps Scott Cawthon intentionally created this confusion to prevent easy identification. Perhaps the male pronouns refer to a different aspect of the entity entirely. Or perhaps they refer to a second spirit sharing Golden Freddy, a spirit who is male, whose presence alongside Cassidy would explain both the ambiguous voice casting and the mixed pronoun usage. This last explanation requires accepting that Golden Freddy is possessed by two children, not one. It requires believing that Cassidy shares her prison with another victim, someone whose story intertwines with hers in ways we're still working to understand. Cassidy's identity seems certain. Her name was revealed through elaborate puzzle solving. Her connection to Golden Freddy is reinforced through multiple sources. Her role as the one you should not have killed, as the vengeful spirit torturing Afton in Ultimate Custom Night, makes narrative sense given what we know about her character. She is, without question, one of the spirits connected to Golden Freddy. The question is whether she's the only spirit, or whether someone else shares that golden cage with her. To understand the second candidate, we need to travel back to 1983, to a birthday party that ended in tragedy, to a crying child whose story began the entire franchise's descent into horror. Let's talk about the boy who died in Fredbear's jaws, the victim whose fate remains one of FNAF's most debated mysteries. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 introduced us to a child whose birthday party became a nightmare. Through minigames played between nights, we watched a young boy tormented by his older brother and his brother's friends, all wearing masks of the animatronic characters. The boy was terrified of the animatronics, crying whenever he saw them, hiding from their mechanical forms even though at this point in the timeline they were just performers, not yet possessed by the vengeful spirits of murdered children. His older brother, wearing a foxy mask, delighted in scaring him, locking him in rooms with the animatronic suits, pushing his fear to greater and greater extremes. The boy clutched a Fredbear plush for comfort, a golden bear that seemed to speak to him, offering cryptic warnings and strange reassurances. "Tomorrow is another day," the plush said. "You're broken," it told him on another night. These weren't normal thoughts for a toy to express, suggesting something more than simple childhood imagination at play. The minigames built toward a terrible inevitability. On the final day, at what appeared to be the boy's own birthday party at Fredbear's family diner, his brother and friends decided on one final scare. They grabbed the crying child despite his struggles, hoisted him up above the crowd, and carried him toward the stage where Fredbear performed. The boy screamed and cried, begging them to stop, but they continued, pushing his head directly into Fredbear's mouth for a big kiss. The spring-lock animatronic's jaws closed. There was a sickening crunch, blood, screaming. The image froze, petals falling around the scene in a surreal moment of horror made dreamlike. This was the bite of 83, a tragedy that would haunt the Afton family and, according to many theories, create the first possessed animatronic in the FNAF timeline. After the bite, we see the boy in a hospital bed, his Fredbear plush and other toys arranged around him, the monotonous beep of medical equipment marking his fading heartbeat. The plush speaks again, promising, "I will put you back together." Then the flatline. The child dies. The community immediately began asking the obvious question. If this child died in Fredbear's jaws, did his spirit possess that golden bear? The connection seemed clear. His death was directly caused by Fredbear. His final moments involved that animatronic. His entire story throughout FNAF 4 centered on his fear of and obsession with these mechanical performers, with Fredbear and his golden form appearing constantly. The nightmare animatronics the player faces each night are nightmarish versions of Fredbear and the gang, suggesting the child's fears manifested in these exaggerated monstrous forms. The final night features Nightmare Fredbear exclusively, and the night after that features Nightmare, a completely black, even more terrifying version of Fredbear, as if the child's terror of this specific character reached an ultimate expression. Everything about FNAF 4 connects this boy to Fredbear in ways both symbolic and literal. If any child should possess the Golden Bear animatronic, it's him. But here's where things get complicated. The crying child's death was public. It happened at a birthday party in front of witnesses. His family knew he died. His body wasn't hidden or stuffed into a suit by a murderer. This makes his possession fundamentally different from the missing children incident, where 5 kids were lured to a back room, murdered in secret, and their bodies hidden inside animatronic suits to decompose undetected. The mechanism of possession in FNAF seems to require certain conditions: a violent death, a connection to an animatronic remnant or agony binding the soul to physical matter. The crying child's death certainly was violent, certainly involved an animatronic, but the public nature of it, the fact that his body presumably received proper burial rather than rotting inside a suit, raises questions about whether the normal possession mechanics would even apply to him. Additionally, if the crying child possessed Golden Freddy, this creates a timeline problem. The missing children incident, where Cassidy and the others were murdered, occurred in 1985 according to most accepted timelines. The bite of 83, as the name suggests, happened 2 years earlier. If the crying child became Golden Freddy in 83, and Cassidy was stuffed into Golden Freddy in 85, how can both possess the same suit? Did the crying child possess Golden Freddy first, and then Cassidy joined him 2 years later, creating a dual possession situation? Did the crying child's spirit linger near Fredbear Golden Freddy without fully possessing it, only properly merging when Cassidy arrived? Or is the entire premise wrong? Is the crying child actually not connected to Golden Freddy at all, his story leading somewhere else entirely? These questions don't have easy answers, and different theories propose different solutions to this timeline conflict. The promise to put him back together has generated intense speculation. What did that phrase mean? Who was speaking, and what were they promising to do? One interpretation suggests this was William Afton, the boy's father, speaking through the Fredbear plush he'd been using to monitor his son throughout the week. The plush shows signs of containing surveillance equipment, evidenced by its unusual camera angles and the different voice tones it uses. Under this reading, William, having lost his youngest son to a tragic accident, might have promised to bring him back somehow, perhaps through the remnant experiments he was conducting, perhaps through possession of an animatronic. This would offer an explanation for William's later obsession with understanding possession, his experiments with the fun-time animatronics, his attempts to achieve immortality through mechanical means. In this interpretation, he wasn't just evil for evil's sake, but was trying to fulfill a promise to his dead son, attempting to put him back together by binding his spirit to metal and wires. This reading would suggest the crying child's possession of Golden Freddy or another animatronic, as it frames the entire possession mechanic as something William developed specifically to resurrect his son. Another interpretation suggests the speaker wasn't William, but the puppet, Charlotte Emily, whose spirit was already bound to her suit by this point in the timeline. Charlotte's role throughout the series involves giving life to the other spirits, granting them new purpose within the animatronics. Her Giving Gifts, Giving Life minigame from FNAF, 2 shows. Her bestowing cake to children, which many interpret as symbolic of her helping them possess the suits where their bodies were hidden. Under this reading, if Charlotte was promising to put the crying child back together, she might have been offering to help his spirit find a vessel, to bind him to Golden Freddy or another suit, to ensure he didn't simply dissipate into nothing. This interpretation emphasizes Charlotte's role as protector and guide for the child spirits, making her the architect of their collective persistence rather than a fellow victim. Whether William or Charlotte spoke those words, the promise itself suggests something beyond simple death. The crying child wouldn't just pass on. He would be reconstructed, reformed, brought back in some fashion. For many theorists, this reconstruction took the form of possession, of his spirit inhabiting Golden Freddy. Evidence connecting the crying child to Golden Freddy appears in several places beyond just FNAF 4. FNAF World, Scott Cawthon's RPG spin-off, features cutscenes with a glitched Fredbear speaking about putting him back together, about finding pieces, about clocks that appear to represent the hidden minigames from FNAF 3. These minigames, when completed, lead to Happiest Day, where the child in the Golden Freddy mask receives their birthday cake. The game has been interpreted by some as depicting the crying child's spirit being reassembled piece by piece until he can finally experience the happy birthday party he never got in life. The child at the table in Happiest Day is alone, separated from the other children, which could suggest he arrived differently, under different circumstances, that his story is distinct from the 5 missing children incident victims, even as it converges with theirs in this final moment of release. The layout of Happiest Day notably mirrors Fredbear's family diner from FNAF 4. The same room arrangement, the same table setup, which some view as this spiritual birthday party, literally giving the crying child what he lost, what was stolen from him by his brother's cruelty and Fredbear's mechanical failure. The phrase, "It's me," could gain additional meaning if the crying child possesses Golden Freddy. Throughout FNAF 1, this phrase appears in hallucinations, on posters, in the player's mind, always connected to Golden Freddy's presence. Under the interpretation that the player is Michael Afton, the crying child's older brother, "It's me" would take on heartbreaking meaning. The spirit would be trying to identify itself to its brother, the person who caused its death. "It's me," the younger brother would be saying. "It's me in this suit. It's me you killed. Remember me." This reading would add tragic layers to Michael's FNAF 1 experience. He's not just surviving against random haunted animatronics. He's being confronted by the ghost of his little brother, a spirit that recognizes him and wants him to understand who he's facing. The game crashes when Golden Freddy appears, perhaps because the weight of this recognition, this confrontation between brothers, is too much for reality to sustain. The game itself cannot process the emotional intensity of this moment, this impossible reunion between killer and victim, between brother and brother. Recent developments have added interesting context to theories about the crying child and Golden Freddy. The week before, a FNAF novel released in late 2024 contains scenes that some interpret as connecting the crying child to Golden Freddy. In the book, when the protagonist listens to a recording of the Bite of 83, He continues to hear a child crying after the recording ends, which could suggest the crying child's spirit lingers around recordings of his death, around memories of that traumatic moment. Golden Freddy then appears and attacks, which theorists have interpreted as drawing a connection between the crying child's spirit and Golden Freddy's manifestation. Later in the book, characters experience what could be interpreted as competing voices in their mind, one attempting to torture them with nightmares and mental attacks, another using a different voice to provide comfort. Some fans view this as evidence of duality within Golden Freddy, suggesting two separate entities operating with different goals. These interpretations, if accepted, would provide some of the strongest recent evidence that Golden Freddy might be possessed by two spirits, not one. If both the crying child and Cassidy were to haunt that golden shell, it could potentially explain these competing impulses, these different voices and methods that appear to operate through the same spectral form. But despite all this evidence, the theory that the crying child possesses Golden Freddy faces significant challenges. The most fundamental issue remains the missing children incident. 5 children were murdered. 5 animatronics were possessed. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Golden Freddy. If the crying child possessed Golden Freddy in '83, before the missing children incident even happened, then who did Cassidy possess? All the other suits were already accounted for by Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, and Fritz. The only remaining possessed animatronic was Golden Freddy. If the crying child was already there, Cassidy would need to either possess a different animatronic entirely, join the crying child in Golden Freddy creating a dual possession situation, or perhaps not possess any suit at all, existing as a separate entity. Each of these possibilities creates new complications, new questions that need answering. The simplest, cleanest explanation remains that Cassidy was the 5th missing children incident victim, stuffed into Golden Freddy, just like the others were stuffed into their respective suits, with no crying child involved at all. There's also the question of why the crying child would want to attack night guards. The other spirits have clear motivation. They were murdered, their innocence stolen, their lives ended violently by a man in a security uniform. They mistake every night guard for their killer, attacking out of confusion and desire for revenge. But the crying child wasn't murdered by William Afton. He died in an accident caused by his brother. Why would his spirit attack Michael or other guards? What's his motivation for aggression? Unless he's confused, unless possession has stripped away enough of his identity that he simply follows the lead of the other spirits, without fully understanding why, his presence in Golden Freddy creates behavioral inconsistencies that are hard to explain. Some theories suggest the crying child isn't actually aggressive, that his presence in Golden Freddy is more passive, that Cassidy handles all the attacking while he exists almost as a passenger. But this raises new questions about how dual possession would even work, whether two spirits sharing one vessel would both have control, or whether one would dominate. The community remains deeply divided on whether the crying child possesses Golden Freddy, and this division stems from genuine ambiguity in the source material. Evidence exists supporting his possession. His death in Fredbear's jaws, his constant association with the Golden Bear throughout FNAF 4, the promise to put him back together, FNAF World's focus on reassembling him, the potential meaning of "it's me" if he's addressing his brother, the week before's implications. But evidence also exists against it. The missing children incident accounting for all 5 suits. His public death lacking the hidden body component that seems necessary for possession. his lack of clear motivation for attacking guards, the timeline complications his possession would create. Neither side can definitively prove their case, because Scott Cawthon hasn't definitively resolved the question. We're left weighing evidence, judging which pieces seem most important, deciding for ourselves which interpretation makes the most narrative sense. For many theorists, the deciding factor comes down to whether Golden Freddy can be possessed by two spirits simultaneously. If dual possession is possible, then both the crying child and Cassidy could haunt Golden Freddy, each contributing their own aspects to his behavior. If dual possession isn't possible, then one of these candidates must be wrong. To understand whether two spirits could share one suit, we need to examine the evidence most directly addressing that question. We need to decode the cryptic conversation hidden in the Survival Logbook. The Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Security Logbook presented itself as a mundane employee handbook, filled with prompts asking night guards to rate their shift satisfaction, describe their worst workplace moments, draw plans for the perfect pizzeria. But careful readers noticed something strange. Text appeared in the book that didn't match the normal printed questions. Faded grey writing asked cryptic questions. Do you remember your name? What do you see? Does he still talk to you? These questions seemed directed at someone specific, someone the faded text was trying to reach. Then there was the altered text, printed words subtly changed to say something different. The rating scale on one page changed existential dread to it was for me. Another page's numbers shifted to spell hidden messages. These alterations responded to the faded text's questions, creating an apparent conversation between two entities using different methods to communicate through the logbook's pages. The key to understanding this conversation was recognizing that three separate writers were using the book. First, Michael Afton, the owner of the logbook, who wrote in red pen and filled out prompts in his own handwriting. Second, the faded text entity, who asked questions in grey ghostly lettering that seemed to overlay the original pages. Third, the altered text entity, who changed printed words to create responses, subtle shifts that required close reading to detect. The interaction between faded text and altered text created a dialogue independent of Michael's use of the book. Two spirits communicating with each other through this physical object. Identifying who these spirits were became crucial to understanding what the conversation meant and what it revealed about Golden Freddy's possession. The faded text questions paint a picture of someone searching for answers, trying to help another entity remember its identity. Do you remember your name? Appears on page 31, positioned next to prompts about reflecting on your happiest day. What do you see? Appears on page 59, beneath a large mirror illustration. Does he still talk to you? Appears on page 75, next to an image of a Fredbear plush. These questions feel like someone trying to jog another person's memory, to help them piece together who they were in life. The subject matter is deeply personal, focusing on identity, perception, and past experiences. The tone is gentle, inquisitive, concerned rather than aggressive. Whoever is asking these questions wants to help the recipient remember something important. The altered text responses are more fragmented, more uncertain. On one page, where faded text asks about memories, altered text replies, I can't see. This response suggests a spirit who has lost or never had visual perception, someone whose connection to the physical world is compromised. On another page, altered text says, I'm scared, a simple expression of fear that contrasts with the vengeful, aggressive behavior we associate with the possessed animatronics. On page 102, where faded text says, "The party was for you," altered text responds, "It was for me," confirming something about a birthday party. These responses build a portrait of a frightened, confused spirit who can't see properly, who is connected to a birthday party, who is responding to questions from another entity, trying to help them remember who they are. The puzzle revealing Cassidy's name connects directly to this conversation. Faded text writes "my name" on multiple pages, alongside coordinate indicators. Following these coordinates through the word search puzzle, collecting letters in order, spells out C-A-S-S-I-D-Y. This strongly suggests faded text is Cassidy. She's the one asking questions, trying to help another spirit remember, and she's identifying herself through this elaborate puzzle. If Cassidy is faded text, asking the questions, then altered text must be someone else responding to her. The most obvious candidate, given the response's content, is the crying child. He can't see because his head was crushed in the bite of 83. He's scared because he was a frightened child even in life. The party was for him, his birthday celebration that ended in tragedy. He's responding to Cassidy's questions, trying to remember his identity, struggling to piece together who he was. This reading implies both Cassidy and the crying child exist within the logbook, communicating through it. But where are they communicating from? The most straightforward interpretation says they're communicating from within Golden Freddy. They share that vessel, two spirits in one animatronic shell, and the logbook has become a medium through which they can talk to each other. Cassidy, the more aware and coherent spirit, is trying to help the crying child remember himself, to help him solidify his identity enough to properly rest. The crying child, damaged and confused from his traumatic death and the nature of his possession, struggles to respond, can barely see, can only offer fragmentary answers to her questions. This interpretation directly supports the two souls theory, suggesting Golden Freddy is possessed by both Cassidy and the crying child in a unique dual possession situation. However, alternative interpretations exist. Some theorists argue faded text isn't Cassidy at all, but Charlotte Emily, the puppet, reaching out to help spirits rest. The puppet's role throughout the franchise involves aiding other spirits, giving them life, helping them pass on. It would make thematic sense for Charlotte to be asking questions, guiding a lost spirit toward remembrance and peace. If faded text is Charlotte, then the conversation might not be happening within Golden Freddy at all. It might be Charlotte communicating with the crying child wherever he is, whether that's Golden Freddy, Shadow Freddy, or somewhere else entirely. Cassidy's name appears as a puzzle solution because the logbook is revealing multiple pieces of information, not because all the spirits involved are in the same location. Another interpretation suggests the conversation is between Michael Afton and one of the spirits, not between two spirits talking to each other. The logbook belonged to Michael, used during his time working at Freddy's. Faded text asks him questions about his past, about his brother, about his memories. He responds through altered text, changing the printed words because he can't write in his own voice anymore. Perhaps because he's dead or spiritually compromised. Do you remember your name? Might be asking Michael to remember he's not just a rotting corpse. He's still Michael Afton. Does he still talk to you? Might refer to the Fredbear plush from his childhood, asking if he still hears his father's voice through that speaker. This reading completely disconnects the logbook conversation from Golden Freddy's possession, making it instead about Michael's own journey towards self-understanding. The community remains split on how to interpret the Survival Logbook's conversation. What seems clear is that multiple entities are using the book to communicate. What remains uncertain is who those entities are, where they're communicating from, and what their relationship to each other signifies. The evidence most strongly suggests Cassidy and the crying child are both present in the logbook, using it as a medium to talk while sharing space in Golden Freddy. But alternative readings have their own merit, their own evidence, their own logical consistency. This ambiguity is characteristic of a FNAF's approach to storytelling. Evidence exists supporting multiple interpretations. Players must decide which reading makes the most sense to them, which explanation best accounts for the available information. The logbook conversation remains one of the strongest pieces of evidence for the two souls theory. If you accept that Cassidy and the crying child are talking to each other through its pages, dual possession becomes almost necessary to explain their interaction. But if you interpret the conversation differently, assign the speakers different identities, the two souls theory loses one of its key supports. Understanding who haunts Golden Freddy requires examining the moments where that spirit's identity matters most to the story, the times when their actions directly affect events in ways that reveal something about their nature. Few moments are more significant than Ultimate Custom Night, the game that seems designed entirely around the vengeful spirit's torment of William Afton, where Golden Freddy's role and identity become central to understanding the entire experience. Ultimate Custom Night places you in the role of William Afton, trapped in what appears to be a personal hell constructed from his own memories and crimes. 50 animatronics attack you, each with unique mechanics, each representing something from Afton's bloody history. The difficulty is overwhelming, the challenge seemingly impossible. And that's the point. This isn't meant to be fair. It's meant to be torment, eternal punishment, a nightmare you can never truly escape. The animatronics aren't just game challenges. They're manifestations of Afton's guilt, his victims, the children he murdered, and the horrors he created coming back to ensure he never finds peace. Running through Ultimate Custom Night structure is a recurring message. Someone is in control here. Someone orchestrated this nightmare, populated it with these specific threats, ensured Afton could never escape. The mediocre melodies, when they attack, speak in overlaid voices. Their normal dialogue about entertainment and music plays on the surface, but beneath it, barely audible, a second voice whispers words of vengeance. He tried to release you. He tried to release us. But I'm not going to let that happen. I will hold you here. I will keep you here, no matter how many times they burn us. These whispered words reveal the mastermind behind Ultimate Custom Night's existence. A spirit who refuses to let Afton die, who keeps him trapped in this nightmare realm, who ignored Henry Emily's attempt to release all the spirits in the pizzeria simulator fire. This spirit has been called the one you should not have killed, a name derived from voice lines referencing an entity Afton wronged in a way beyond his other victims, someone whose murder created a unique and unstoppable force of vengeance. Golden Freddy's behavior in Ultimate Custom Night strongly suggests he is this orchestrating presence. When you achieve a high score, the final cutscene shows Golden Freddy's slumped form twitching in darkness, struggling against something, unable to fade away peacefully. The imagery suggests a spirit in turmoil, caught between the desire to maintain vengeance and the need to finally rest. If you set Golden Freddy's difficulty to 1 and attempt to use a death coin on him, Fredbear immediately jump scares you, killing you instantly. The game seems to be saying you cannot kill Golden Freddy because he is the one you should not have killed, the entity whose destruction would end this torment and release Afton. Death coins work on every other animatronic, removing them from the night, but they backfire when used on Golden Freddy, suggesting his immunity, his untouchable status as the nightmare's architect. The identity of the one you should not have killed has generated intense debate. The voice casting call for this character specifically requested ambiguity. The voice actor was asked to portray a young child speaking in whisper, with the gender not immediately clear, capable of reading as either a young boy or young girl. This intentional ambiguity suggests Scott Cawthon wanted to keep the vengeful spirit's identity mysterious. However, animatronics within the game complicate this ambiguity. Withered Chica says, "I have seen him, the one you should not have killed." Mangle says, "He's here and always watching, the one you should not have killed." Both use male pronouns, referring to the vengeful spirit as he and him. This pronoun usage could suggest a male child, which would contradict the common understanding that Cassidy is female based on the fourth closet's description and the Survival Logbook's illustration. However, the interpretation of these pronouns remains debated within the community. Multiple explanations have been proposed for this pronoun usage. Perhaps the animatronics are referring to Golden Freddy, the suit itself, using masculine pronouns for the animatronic rather than the spirit within. Animatronics in FNAF are gendered based on their character, not their possessing spirit, so referring to Golden Freddy as he would be natural regardless of the spirit's actual gender. Perhaps the male pronouns refer to a different aspect of Golden Freddy's identity. If the suit contains both Cassidy and the crying child, and the crying child is male, then saying he might reference him specifically, while leaving Cassidy's involvement implied. Perhaps Scott Cawthon created this contradiction intentionally, or it reflects evolving characterization decisions. The voice casting requested ambiguity, but in-game dialogue used male pronouns, creating a contradiction that fans continue to interpret in various ways. Or perhaps, as some theorists propose, the male pronouns are exactly correct, and the one you should not have killed isn't Cassidy at all, but someone else entirely, possibly a sixth victim or a boy whose story hasn't been fully revealed. The face that appears in the vents throughout Ultimate Custom Night adds another layer of mystery. This face, a blonde child with innocent features, has been widely assumed to represent the one you should not have killed visually. But the face doesn't clearly resemble any known victim. It's not obviously Cassidy based on her described appearance. It doesn't match the crying child's depiction in FNAF 4. Scott Cawthon later stated that the face used in Ultimate Custom Night was simply a stock photo, a convenient image selected without deep lore significance, much like the family photos used in FNAF 4 weren't meant to reveal actual plot details. This statement somewhat undercuts analysis based on the face's appearance, suggesting we shouldn't read too much into its specific features. The face is a placeholder representing the one you should not have killed, without necessarily showing us what that spirit actually looked like in life. The Old Man Consequences minigame provides the most explicit commentary on the vengeful spirit situation. Accessed through drowning yourself in a red lake, this minigame features a simple fishing game where a red bear representing the player sits by the water, while Old Man Consequences fishes nearby. The fisherman speaks, saying, "Leave the demon to his demons. Rest your own soul. There is nothing else." Then the game crashes, ending Ultimate Custom Night entirely. This minigame seems to be a plea directed at the vengeful spirit. Stop tormenting Afton. Stop holding onto your vengeance. Let him rot in whatever hell he deserves, and focus on your own peace, your own need to rest. The red bear doesn't respond. The lake remains still. The game crashes, suggesting the plea goes unheeded, the spirit unwilling or unable to let go. This scene reinforces that Ultimate Custom Night is fundamentally about a spirit's refusal to move on, their determination to keep Afton's suffering superseding any other consideration, including their own well-being. If we accept that Cassidy is the one you should not have killed, the spirit orchestrating Ultimate Custom Night, certain story elements click into place. Cassidy was the 5th missing children incident victim, stuffed into Golden Freddy's suit. When Henry Emily initiated the fire in Pizzeria Simulator, attempting to release all trapped spirits, the other children moved on. Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, even Charlotte in some interpretations, they all accepted their release and passed into whatever lies beyond. But Cassidy refused. Her hatred for Afton was too strong. She couldn't let go while he remained unpunished, couldn't accept peace while he might escape justice. So she remained, her spirit attached to Afton even after his physical form burned, and she constructed Ultimate Custom Night as a realm of punishment. This interpretation makes Cassidy uniquely important to FNAF's conclusion. She isn't just another victim. She's the victim who refused to let Afton off easy, who ensured he'd pay for his crimes eternally, whose anger was so potent it could construct and maintain an entire dimension. However, if we accept that the one you should not have killed is male based on the pronoun usage, and Cassidy is female, then someone else must be orchestrating Ultimate Custom Night. The most popular alternative candidate is Andrew from the Man in Room 1280. In that Fazbear Fright story, Andrew is explicitly shown keeping Afton alive but suffering, attached to his spirit, refusing to let him die. Andrew is male, matching the pronouns used in Ultimate Custom Night. Andrew is described wearing an alligator mask when appearing as a ghost, paralleling the masks worn by children in various FNAF minigames. Andrew's role in Fazbear Frights mirrors the vengeful spirit's role in Ultimate Custom Night so closely that many theorists believe they're meant to be the same character. If we accept Fazbear Frights as providing explanations for game events, as Scott suggested they sometimes would, then Andrew might be the one you should not have killed in the games as well, with Cassidy playing a different role or existing elsewhere entirely. But here's where the dual possession theory offers an elegant solution to these contradictions. What if both Cassidy and the crying child haunt Golden Freddy, and both participate in Ultimate Custom Night's creation and maintenance? Cassidy could be the primary orchestrator, the vengeful spirit whose anger drives the nightmare's existence, while the crying child could be present but more passive, contributing to Golden Freddy's power without taking an active role in tormenting Afton. This would explain the ambiguous voice casting. The whispered voice could be either Cassidy or the crying child because both are present. The male pronouns could refer to the crying child specifically, while the actual control comes from Cassidy. Golden Freddy's twitching in the final cutscene could represent internal conflict between two spirits with different goals. Cassidy wanting to maintain vengeance, the crying child wanting to let go and rest. The old man. Consequence's plea could be directed at both of them, asking them to release each other, to stop their shared vigil, to finally pursue their own peace. This dual interpretation helps resolve a fundamental tension in Ultimate Custom Night's characterization. The vengeful spirit seems simultaneously to be the same entity who appeared in earlier games as Golden Freddy, maintaining continuity across the franchise, while also being characterized with details that don't quite match previous Golden Freddy appearances, creating discontinuity and confusion. If Golden Freddy has always been possessed by two spirits, then both continuity and discontinuity make sense. The entity is consistent because it's still Golden Freddy with the same spirits, but details shift because different spirits might be more or less prominent at different times, their combined presence creating behavior that's more complex than a single spirit would produce. Ultimate Custom Night becomes the moment where this duality matters most, where the tensions between two spirits sharing one vessel come to the forefront, where their different approaches to justice and vengeance play out on the largest stage. Ultimately, Ultimate Custom Night provides strong evidence that Golden Freddy is the one you should not have killed, the orchestrating spirit. But it doesn't definitively answer whether that spirit is Cassidy alone, the crying child alone, both together, or someone else entirely. The intentional ambiguities, the contradicting details, the pronoun mismatches, all of these suggest Scott Cawthon wanted this question to remain open, wanted players to debate and theorize rather than receiving a simple answer. Ultimate Custom Night is important to the Golden Freddy question, not because it solves the mystery, but because it highlights how much the mystery matters, how central this spirit's identity is to understanding FNAF's conclusion. Whether one soul or two haunt Golden Freddy changes how we interpret this entire game, changes what Ultimate Custom Night means for the story's resolution, changes whether the series ends with vengeance satisfied or vengeance eternal. When examining whether Golden Freddy could be possessed by two spirits, one piece of evidence stands above all others in importance. The Stitchwraith, a character from Fazbear Fright's interconnected epilogue stories, demonstrates that multiple souls can inhabit a single animatronic and communicate with each other while doing so. It's important to note that Fazbear Fright stories were described by Scott Cawthon as filling in blanks from the game's story, though they exist in a separate continuity. While not everything from these books applies directly to the games, they can provide frameworks for understanding how certain mechanics work in the FNAF universe. Understanding the Stitchwraith's nature and his potential relationship to Golden Freddy becomes crucial for evaluating whether the two souls theory is even possible within FNAF's established rules. The Stitchwraith is an endoskeleton possessed by two boys, Jake and Andrew, whose spirits merged within this mechanical vessel after their deaths. Jake inhabits a doll's head attached to the endoskeleton, controlling its vision and movement. Andrew inhabits the battery powering the endoskeleton, unable to see but capable of hearing and affecting the world through his intense anger. These two boys didn't know each other in life. They came together after death through circumstance and agony, bound to the same vessel, forced to cooperate despite their different goals and perspectives. Jake's story comes from The Real Jake, a Fazbear Fright's tale about a boy dying of cancer, whose father, struggling with grief, created a Simon doll for him. When Jake died, his spirit possessed this doll, inhabiting it with his consciousness and memories. The doll eventually ended up with Dr. Phineas Taggart, a scientist experimenting with agony as an animating force. Phineas attached Jake's doll head to an endoskeleton he was building, intending to create a vessel for pain-based energy to inhabit. But he needed a power source, something to drive the endoskeleton's movements. That's where Andrew came in. Andrew's story connects to the man in room 1280, where he kept William Afton trapped in a comatose state, refusing to let him die. When Afton finally did die at the Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center, Andrew's spirit dispersed into various objects with which Afton's burned body came into contact, spreading his anger and agony through infected remnant. One of these infected objects was Fetch's battery, an animatronic dog's power source that Phineas Taggart later acquired. When Phineas assembled the Stitchwraith, placing Jake's doll head on the endoskeleton and inserting Fetch's Andrew-infected battery, he created a unique dual possession situation. Two souls, two distinct consciousnesses, inhabiting one mechanical body. Jake had control of movement and sight, able to walk the endoskeleton around and see through its vision. Andrew existed as an angry presence within the battery, unable to see, capable only of listening and occasionally influencing the endoskeleton's actions through bursts of electrical rage. Initially, Jake didn't even know Andrew was there. He thought he was alone in the endoskeleton, confused about why touching people seemed to zap them with electricity, why infected objects appeared throughout the city. Only after exploring his own nature did Jake discover Andrew's presence, learning to communicate with him, establishing a partnership between two spirits who needed to work together to accomplish their goals. The Stitchwraith story arc centers on cooperation despite differences. Jake wants to help people, to collect the infected objects Andrew's anger created and prevent them from causing harm. Andrew wants revenge, wants to hurt anyone who reminds him of his pain, wants to spread agony because agony is all he understands anymore. These conflicting goals create tension within the Stitchwraith. Moments where Jake has to restrain Andrew's impulses. Times when Andrew's anger helps them overcome obstacles Jake couldn't handle alone. They argue, they compromise, they learn about each other. Eventually they work toward a common purpose, collecting infected items, confronting Eleanor, the antagonist entity, trying to undo some of the damage their presence has caused. By the end of the epilogue sequence, Jake has helped Andrew move on, granting him the peace he couldn't achieve on his own, sacrificing his own continued existence to ensure Andrew finds release from his pain. The parallel between the Stitchwraith and Golden Freddy has been noted by many theorists. If Jake and Andrew can share the Stitchwraith, two distinct souls with different perspectives and abilities, communicating and cooperating within one animatronic body, then it stands to reason that Cassidy and the crying child could share Golden Freddy in a similar way. Under this interpretation, Cassidy would be the more active, aware spirit. Like Jake controlling movement and vision, the crying child would be more passive and damaged, like Andrew trapped in the battery, unable to see, struggling with memory and identity. They could communicate with each other, which would explain the Survival Logbook conversation, where one spirit asks questions and the other responds. They would have different goals. Cassidy focused on vengeance, the crying child wanting peace, creating the internal conflict that might be visible in Ultimate Custom Night's final cutscene. They would both contribute to Golden Freddy's actions, potentially explaining why his behavior sometimes seems vengeful and aggressive, other times more protective and sad. The Stitchwraith doesn't just prove dual possession is possible within the FNAF universe. It provides a potential template for understanding exactly how dual possession might work in Golden Freddy's case. Scott Cawthon stated that Fazbear Frights would help fill in blanks from the game's story. In a Reddit post addressing the book's canonicity, he explained that while Fazbear Frights exists in its own continuity separate from the games, certain characters and plot points would connect directly to game lore, providing answers or parallels that help players understand the games better. The Stitchwraith, prominently featured across 12 epilogue chapters, wasn't a minor character. He was important to the book's overarching narrative, connected to William Afton's fate, tied to concepts like remnant and agony that are central to game lore. If any Fazbear Fright's character seems designed to illuminate game mysteries, it's the Stitchwraith. His dual possession situation aligns closely with Golden Freddy's ambiguities, which many theorists interpret as Scott providing an answer to, can two souls possess one animatronic? Under this reading, the answer is yes, as demonstrated by Jake and Andrew in the Stitchwraith. However, accepting Fazbear Frights as a parallel source requires careful navigation. Not everything in the books maps directly to the games. The books feature characters and events that clearly don't exist in game continuity, like Eleanor, the puppet carver, many of the supernatural items and scenarios. Treating the books as one-to-one parallels would create massive contradictions and introduce elements that have no basis in game evidence. The better approach is viewing Fazbear Frights as exploring concepts, themes, and mechanics that exist in both continuities, even if specific details differ. The books show how remnant works, how agony spreads, how possession functions, providing mechanical explanations that help us understand what's happening in the games without requiring us to believe every book event literally happened in game timeline. The Stitchwraith demonstrates that dual possession is mechanically possible within FNAF's universe, that two souls can share one vessel and maintain distinct identities. Whether that specifically happens with Golden Freddy in the games remains a separate question. Some theorists argue the Stitchwraith parallel has limitations. Jake and Andrew came together after death through coincidental circumstance. Phineas Taggart assembled them into the Stitchwraith artificially, placing Jake's head and Andrew's battery into a neutral endoskeleton. This differs from how Golden Freddy would be possessed if the dual soul theory is correct. Cassidy was murdered and stuffed into Golden Freddy in 1985, binding her spirit to that suit through traditional FNAF possession mechanics. If the crying child also possesses Golden Freddy, he either arrived first in 1983, when he died in Fredbear's jaws, and Cassidy joined him 2 years later, or he arrived later after Cassidy, somehow merging with her established possession. Neither scenario quite matches the Stitchwraith's assembly, where both souls arrived essentially simultaneously into a neutral vessel. The mechanical process would be different, raising questions about whether the same outcome could occur. Additionally, the Stitchwraith's two souls are positioned differently than Golden Freddy's hypothetical two souls would be. Jake controls the body, handles movement and decision-making. Andrew is relegated to the battery, limited in his influence, more of a passenger than an equal partner. If this paralleled Golden Freddy exactly, it would suggest one spirit, presumably Cassidy, maintains primary control while the crying child exists in a diminished capacity, barely able to contribute. But evidence about Golden Freddy suggests something more balanced, or at least different. The Survival Logbook shows communication between equals, one asking questions and one answering, with no clear dominance hierarchy. Ultimate Custom Night's gender ambiguity suggests both spirits contribute to the vengeful presence, not one dominating while the other hides. If Golden Freddy is possessed by two souls, their arrangement might differ from the Stitchwraith's, making the parallel less direct than it initially appears. There's also the question of whether we should accept Fazbear Fright's parallels at all. Some community members argue the books are completely separate from the games, providing no insight into game lore whatsoever. Scott's statement that the books would help fill in blanks gets interpreted different ways. Perhaps he meant the books would provide thematic understanding, emotional context, character depth, rather than literal mechanical explanations. Perhaps he meant only certain specific elements connect, and players need to figure out which ones matter. Perhaps he meant something else entirely, and the community has overinterpreted his words, seeking book answers for game questions that should be solved through game evidence alone. If you reject Fazbear Frights as a valid source of parallel information, the Stitchwraith tells you nothing about Golden Freddy. He's simply a book character existing in book continuity, with no bearing on whether dual possession happens in the games. Despite these limitations, the Stitchwraith remains one of the strongest pieces of evidence supporting the possibility of Golden Freddy being possessed by two souls. He demonstrates the concept is mechanically viable within FNAF's universe, that two distinct consciousnesses can inhabit one animatronic body, communicate with each other, and maintain separate identities while sharing physical space. This directly addresses one of the main objections to the dual soul theory, the argument that possession simply doesn't work that way in FNAF. The Stitchwraith shows it can work that way, that Scott Cawthon has written dual possession into his universe, that the mechanics exist even if their specific implementation might vary between the books and games. Whether you accept this as evidence that Golden Freddy is possessed by two souls depends on how much weight you give to Fazbear Fright's parallels, how closely you think book mechanics mirror game mechanics, and whether you believe Scott included the Stitchwraith specifically to answer the Golden Freddy question, or for other narrative reasons unrelated to game lore. The debate over the Stitchwraith's significance highlights broader questions about how to interpret FNAF's sprawling multimedia narrative. Should we analyze games in isolation, using only in-game evidence? Should we incorporate books as supporting material, drawing parallels while acknowledging separate continuities? Should we treat Scott's statements as authoritative explanations or as unreliable narrator tricks meant to mislead? Every theorist makes different choices about which sources to trust, which connections to draw, which parallels to accept. These choices fundamentally shape conclusions about Golden Freddy's identity. The Stitchwraith can prove dual possession is possible, or prove nothing relevant to the games, depending entirely on your approach to interpreting FNAF's evidence. This interpretative flexibility is both FNAF's greatest strength as a storytelling exercise and its greatest frustration for players seeking definitive answers. One of Five Nights at Freddy's 3's most significant minigames provides crucial context for understanding Golden Freddy's story and his ultimate fate, regardless of whether one soul or two haunt that golden shell. Happiest Day represents a moment of release, a carefully orchestrated ritual allowing trapped spirits to finally move beyond their suffering into whatever peaceful existence awaits. Understanding who receives this gift, who gives it, and what it means for Golden Freddy becomes essential for evaluating competing theories about his possession. The Happiest Day minigame is accessed by clicking a specific poster in FNAF 3's camera system, leading to a simple side-scrolling sequence where you control the puppet's spirit. Walking through a party room decorated with balloons and tables, you pass children wearing animal masks, creatures that seem to represent various FNAF characters, before reaching the far side where a lone child sits at a table, crying. If you've completed all the other secret minigames and achieved their good endings, 4 children wearing Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy masks appear on the table's other side. These are the spirits of Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, and Fritz, the 4 confirmed missing children incident victims, gathered for this final ceremony. As the puppet approaches the table, cake appears. The crying child stops crying. They stand and don a Golden Freddy mask, their identity now clearly marked as the spirit possessing that golden suit. Then, one by one, all 6 spirits present, the 4 MCI victims, the Golden Freddy child, and the puppet, begin to disappear. Their masks fall to the ground as their forms fade, and 6 balloons float upward through the ceiling, representing their ascension to a peaceful afterlife. This imagery strongly suggests these spirits have been released, freed from their earthly imprisonment, allowed to rest after years of haunting the pizzerias where they died. The minigame is called Happiest Day because it gives the crying child what they never received in life: a proper birthday celebration, surrounded by friends, receiving a cake, experiencing joy instead of fear. The spiritual party fulfills the unfulfilled, correcting cosmic injustice through symbolic ritual. The layout of Happiest Day mirrors Fredbear's family diner, as depicted in FNAF 4's minigames. The room arrangement, the positioning of tables, the overall atmosphere match the location where the crying child attended his final birthday party before the bite of 83. This parallel suggests Happiest Day is specifically designed for the crying child, recreating the location where his trauma occurred, but transforming it into a space of joy rather than fear. The other children gather to support him, to ensure this birthday ends differently than his last one, to give him what was stolen by his brother's cruelty and Fredbear's mechanical failure. This reading strongly implies the Golden Freddy child receiving cake in Happiest Day is the crying child, that his story ends here with this spiritual party giving him closure. However, there's a compelling argument that Cassidy, not the crying child, receives Happiest Day's closure. The other 4 children present are all missing children incident victims. Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, and Fritz were murdered together, stuffed into suits together, bound by their shared tragedy. It makes thematic sense that the 5th MCI victim, Cassidy, would ascend with them, that their release would come as a group after finally achieving the justice or closure they needed. The child receiving cake being seated alone on one side while the others gather on the other side could simply represent Cassidy as the final piece, the last victim to be given closure, rather than indicating they're fundamentally different from the others. In this reading, Happiest Day is the missing children's collective release, all 5 victims plus the puppet moving on together, with no crying child involved at all. When does Happiest Day occur in the timeline? The minigame appears in FNAF 3. Accessible during the week, you guard the Fazbear's Fright horror attraction. But does it represent something happening during that week? Or is it a metaphorical depiction of something that happens later? Some theorists argue Happiest Day occurs after FNAF 3 ends. After the Fazbear's Fright fire destroys the building and releases the spirits, the fire serves as the final purification, burning away physical anchors, allowing the minigames you completed to manifest as spiritual reality that frees the children. In this interpretation, successfully completing the secret minigames represents you helping prepare for Happiest Day, setting pieces in place, but the actual release doesn't happen until the flames do their work. Others argue Happiest Day occurs much later, after Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. Henry Emily's speech in that game explicitly addresses the spirits, telling them to give up their own spirits, to let go of their earthly attachments, to accept the release he's providing through this final fire. The Lawkeeper ending shows gravestones for the children, suggesting they finally rest after the FFPS fire. Perhaps Happiest Day represents this moment, the spiritual reality of what happens when Henry's plan succeeds and the children finally accept peace. This would place Happiest Day in 2023 or later, years after FNAF 3, making it a representation of the story's ultimate resolution rather than something that happened earlier. A few theorists even argue Happiest Day never happens in the timeline at all. It's entirely metaphorical, a symbolic representation of what the children need, not a depiction of what they actually receive. The bad ending of FNAF 3 shows the animatronic head still lit, suggesting spirits remain after the Fazbear's Fright Fire. If the spirits are still trapped after FNAF 3, Happiest Day didn't occur when that game suggested. Perhaps it's a future possibility, something that could happen if certain conditions are met, rather than an event that definitely occurs. This reading treats Happiest Day as aspirational, showing what release would look like without confirming it actually happened. The timing question matters for understanding Golden Freddy's fate. If Happiest Day occurred after FNAF 3, before Ultimate Custom Night, it raises questions about why Golden Freddy is still active during UCN, still tormenting William Afton, still refusing to rest. Did Happiest Day fail to release Golden Freddy specifically? Did they participate, but then return to their vigil, unable to let go of vengeance even after tasting peace? Or did Happiest Day happen for the other children, but not for Golden Freddy, who requires additional closure, additional healing, beyond what that ceremony provided? If Happiest Day hasn't happened yet by Ultimate Custom Night, if the spirits still await their release, it changes UCN's meaning, makes it less about one vengeful spirit refusing to move on, and more about collective unfinished business keeping everyone trapped. The dual soul theory offers interesting possibilities for interpreting Happiest Day. If both Cassidy and the crying child possess Golden Freddy, perhaps Happiest Day releases one of them, but not the other. The crying child, having received his symbolic birthday party, finally accepts peace and ascends with the balloon, while Cassidy remains, her business still unfinished, her need for vengeance unsatisfied. This would explain why Golden Freddy appears to participate in Happiest Day, donning the mask and seeming to fade with the others, but then returns in Ultimate Custom Night, still active, still angry. It wasn't Golden Freddy failing to move on. It was one of Golden Freddy's two souls accepting release, while the other consciously chose to remain, splitting the dual possession, leaving Cassidy alone in the suit afterward. This reading preserves both Happiest Day's apparent success in releasing spirits and Ultimate Custom Night's depiction of Golden Freddy as still active, by allowing both to be true for different spirits at different times. Alternatively, if Golden Freddy is possessed by two souls, perhaps Happiest Day requires both to be ready, both to accept release simultaneously, and that's what the ceremony struggles to achieve. Throughout FNAF's story, we see Golden Freddy torn between vengeance and peace, between aggression and sadness, between pursuing justice and letting go. Maybe this internal conflict is literally two spirits with different goals, pulling Golden Freddy in different directions. Happiest Day temporarily unites them, gets them both to agree to move on together, successfully releasing both for a time. But the release doesn't hold. Cassidy's vengeful nature reasserts itself. She returns, drags the crying child back with her, and they both participate in constructing Ultimate Custom Night. Only after that torment, after Cassidy finally exhausts her anger, after the old man consequences intervention, do both spirits truly let go and accept permanent peace. This reading makes Golden Freddy's arc more tragic, depicting spirits who briefly achieved release only to voluntarily return to suffering, unable to rest while their killer might escape justice. The Happiest Day minigame represents both hope and ambiguity in Five Nights at Freddy's lore. It shows that release is possible, that spirits can move beyond their trauma and suffering. But it leaves crucial questions unanswered. Who exactly receives this release? When does it occur? Does it succeed permanently, or is it temporary? Can spirits who have been released return if they choose? Different answers to these questions support different theories about Golden Freddy's identity and fate. The minigame is simultaneously evidence for the one soul theory, showing Cassidy receiving release with the other MCI victims, and evidence for the two souls theory, depicting the crying child receiving his symbolic birthday, while Cassidy potentially remains active afterward. This interpretive flexibility makes Happiest Day a Rorschach test for theories about Golden Freddy. What you see in those falling masks and rising balloons depends on what you believe about who haunts that suit. For those who believe Golden Freddy is possessed by a single soul, Cassidy alone haunting that spectral suit, the evidence supporting this interpretation deserves thorough examination. This isn't a fringe theory built on wishful thinking. The one soul theory has substantial support from canon sources, addresses real concerns about timeline and mechanism, and offers a clean narrative that doesn't require elaborate explanations for how dual possession would work. Let's explore why many theorists conclude Golden Freddy is Cassidy, only Cassidy, with no second spirit sharing that vessel. The most fundamental argument for the one soul theory comes from simple accounting. The missing children incident involved 5 victims. William Afton, dressed as Spring Bonnie, lured 5 children to the back room and murdered them, stuffing their bodies into 5 animatronic suits. Gabriel went into Freddy, Jeremy went into Bonnie, Susie went into Chica, Fritz went into Foxy, and the 5th child, whose name was later revealed as Cassidy, went into Golden Freddy. This creates a perfect one-to-one correspondence. 5 victims, 5 possessed animatronics, no leftovers, no gaps. If we add the crying child as a 6th possessed animatronic, we disrupt this symmetry. We're left asking which child possessed which suit, with too many spirits and not enough vessels, or too many vessels and not enough confirmed murders. The crying child's death also occurred under fundamentally different circumstances than the missing children incident. The MCI victims were lured away from their families, murdered in secret, and their bodies hidden inside suits where they decomposed undetected for days or weeks. This created the specific conditions necessary for possession in FNAF's universe. The children's remnant, their spiritual essence, had nowhere else to go. It bonded with the suits containing their corpses, fusing soul to metal in a grotesque union. The crying child's death was public, witnessed by a restaurant full of people. His body wasn't hidden in a suit. It was presumably taken to a hospital, then prepared for burial by his grieving family. Without that specific mechanism of secret murder and hidden corpse, why would the crying child possess anything? His death was tragic, but didn't create the conditions other possessions required. Arguing he possesses Golden Freddy requires explaining how his possession worked differently from every other confirmed possession in the series. The Survival Logbook, often cited as evidence for 2 souls, can be interpreted as supporting the one soul theory instead. When Cassidy's name is revealed through the word search puzzle, it appears in the context of my name questions. Faded text asks, "What is your name?" and the puzzle answers Cassidy. The most straightforward reading is that Cassidy is identifying herself, spelling out her name in response to questions about identity. The altered text responses like, "I can't see," and "I'm scared," don't necessarily come from a different spirit in Golden Freddy. They could come from Michael Afton, the logbook's owner, responding to questions from Cassidy, who is haunting the book or communicating through it. "I can't see" might refer to Michael's decaying body after the scooper hollowed him out, leaving him functionally blind or at least visually impaired. "I'm scared" might express his emotional state as an undead creature pursuing his father. The conversation isn't between two spirits in Golden Freddy. It's between Cassidy in Golden Freddy and Michael, who owns the logbook, a spirit reaching out to a living person, rather than two spirits talking to each other. Ultimate Custom Night's gender ambiguity, rather than suggesting two spirits, might simply reflect Scott Cawthon's desire to keep Cassidy's identity mysterious. The ambiguous voice casting could be an intentional red herring, making players question whether the vengeful spirit is who they assume. The male pronouns from Withered Chica and Mangle might refer to Golden Freddy, the animatronic suit, which is masculine gendered, rather than the spirit within. Or they might be Scott experimenting with different characterizations, testing how ambiguous he could make things before players would accept confusion as intentional. If we accept that the one you should not have killed is Cassidy, the gender inconsistencies become anomalies to explain away, rather than clues pointing toward a different identity. The core evidence still suggests Cassidy is the vengeful spirit. The pronoun mismatches are noise, not signal. Help Wanted 2 introduced memory dolls representing the missing children incident victims. These dolls appear in a specific order and context that helps identify which child possesses which animatronic. The Golden Freddy memory doll is explicitly connected to Cassidy through its appearance and positioning. This relatively recent addition to canon suggests Scott Cawthon is confirming Cassidy as Golden Freddy's sole possessor, not complicating the relationship with additional spirits. If Golden Freddy were possessed by both Cassidy and the crying child, you'd expect Help Wanted 2 to acknowledge this somehow, perhaps through 2 memory dolls for Golden Freddy, or through ambiguous imagery suggesting multiplicity. Instead, we get 1 doll, connecting 1 spirit to Golden Freddy, supporting the simpler one soul interpretation. The FNAF 3 good ending shows all the animatronic heads with their lights turned off, indicating the spirits have been released. This includes Golden Freddy's head, suggesting his possessing spirit achieved peace along with the others. If Golden Freddy were possessed by 2 souls, and only one found release while the other remained active, we'd expect his head to remain lit, or show some other indication of continued possession. The clean shutoff implies 1 spirit was released, and that spirit was the only one there. When Ultimate Custom Night later shows Golden Freddy still active, it represents something different. Perhaps Cassidy returning after initially accepting release, or perhaps UCN, occurring in a separate reality from the main timeline, a nightmare dimension disconnected from the spirit's actual fates. The good ending's imagery doesn't require dual possession to explain. 1 spirit was released, then circumstances brought that spirit back or kept it trapped elsewhere. From a narrative perspective, the one soul theory creates a cleaner, more focused story. Cassidy is the 5th missing children incident victim, murdered like the others, possessed her suit like the others, haunted the pizzerias for the same reasons as the others. She's distinguished from her fellow victims primarily by her refusal to let go, her determination to ensure William Afton suffers. This makes her special without making her fundamentally different in kind. She's not possessed differently, not sharing her suit with someone else, not operating under unique mechanics. She's simply the most vengeful, the one whose anger burns brightest, the one who refuses release even when offered. This characterization is powerful and doesn't require additional spirits to justify. Adding the crying child to Golden Freddy dilutes Cassidy's agency, makes her story about duality rather than singular determination, raises questions about how two spirits cooperate or conflict that distract from her core character journey. The one soul theory also avoids mechanical complications about how dual possession works. If two spirits share one suit, how do they decide who controls it? Are they both equally active, or does one dominate? Can they communicate freely, or are they isolated from each other? Do they share memories and perceptions, or experience things separately? These questions demand answers if we accept dual possession, but the source material doesn't provide clear explanations. It's much simpler to assume one spirit per animatronic, following the pattern established with Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. Each murdered child possesses the suit where their body was hidden. No sharing, no complexity, just straightforward one-to-one possession. Golden Freddy fits this pattern perfectly if Cassidy is his sole possessor, just as Gabriel is Freddy's sole possessor. The pattern only breaks if we insist on adding extra spirits where they aren't needed. Proponents of the one soul theory often point out that the crying child might possess something other than Golden Freddy entirely, solving the "what happened to him" question without requiring dual possession. Perhaps he possesses Shadow Freddy, the dark spectral figure seen in FNAF 2 and 3, explaining why that entity exists, and giving the crying child a vessel without crowding Golden Freddy. Perhaps he possesses nothing. His promise to be put back together, fulfilled through Michael remembering him, through Michael's actions in later games, honoring his brother's memory and seeking to free the spirits. Perhaps he did initially possess Golden Freddy in 83, but when Cassidy was stuffed into that suit in 85, her stronger remnant connection overrode his weaker possession, effectively evicting him or absorbing his presence into hers. These alternatives prevent the crying child from simply dissipating into nothing, while maintaining the one soul per animatronic rule that seems to govern most possessions. The one soul theory's greatest strength is its simplicity and adherence to established patterns. It doesn't require elaborate parallel interpretations from Fazbear Frights. It doesn't demand accepting that possession works differently for Golden Freddy than for every other animatronic. It doesn't create timeline headaches about how two spirits from different incidents ended up in the same suit. It follows the missing children incident's logic directly. 5 children murdered, 5 animatronics possessed, with Cassidy as the 5th child and Golden Freddy as the 5th animatronic. Clean, simple, narratively satisfying. Everything we know about Cassidy's character, her appearance in the Survival Logbook, her role as the vengeful spirit in Ultimate Custom Night, her presence in Happiest Day, fits perfectly with her being Golden Freddy's sole possessor. We don't need to add extra spirits to explain her behavior or her story. For theorists who believe this interpretation, the two souls theory represents overcomplication, reading meaning into ambiguities that don't necessarily exist, connecting dots that might not be meant to connect. The evidence for dual possession comes primarily from interpreting the Survival Logbook conversation as between 2 Golden Freddy spirits, accepting the Stitchwraith as a direct parallel despite being from book continuity, and assuming the crying child must possess something when his fate might simply be death without possession. Remove those interpretive leaps, and the evidence supporting two souls evaporates, leaving only the straightforward reading that Cassidy alone haunts Golden Freddy, making her FNAF's most important victim, the spirit who refused to let go, the one who kept William Afton trapped in torment after everyone else had moved on. This is a powerful narrative that doesn't need additional complexity to work. It stands on its own as a complete interpretation of Golden Freddy's identity, yet for every argument supporting the one soul theory, there's a counter-argument from those who believe Golden Freddy is possessed by two souls, both Cassidy and the crying child, sharing that golden vessel in a unique dual possession arrangement. The two souls theory, often called Golden Duo by its proponents, isn't baseless speculation. It's built on substantial evidence from multiple games and sources, addresses aspects of Golden Freddy's behavior that the one soul theory struggles to explain, and offers a richer, more complex narrative that adds depth to both Cassidy's and the crying child's stories. Let's examine why many theorists believe Golden Freddy is haunted by two spirits. The Stitchwraith provides the clearest demonstration that dual possession is possible in FNAF's universe. Jake and Andrew, two distinct souls with separate identities and goals, share the Stitchwraith endoskeleton in Fazbear Fright's epilogue stories. They communicate with each other inside their shared vessel. They cooperate despite conflicting objectives. They maintain individual agency while occupying one body. This proves the concept isn't just theoretically possible, but has been explicitly written into FNAF canon by Scott Cawthon. If dual possession exists in Fazbear Frights, and Scott stated the books would help fill in blanks from the game story, it's reasonable to conclude dual possession also exists in the games. The Stitchwraith isn't just a random book character. He's intimately connected to the series' core concepts, involved in stories about William Afton, Remnant, and Agony. His prominent role across 12 epilogue chapters suggests importance beyond simple book entertainment. Scott likely included the Stitchwraith specifically to demonstrate how dual possession works, providing a template for understanding Golden Freddy's situation. Jake and Andrew's relationship parallels potential dynamics between Cassidy and the crying child. One soul is more active and aware, one is more damaged and passive. They help each other, communicate with each other, and eventually work toward a common goal, despite starting from different places. This mirrors what we might expect from Cassidy and the crying child, sharing Golden Freddy. The Survival Logbook's conversation strongly suggests two entities communicating. Faded text asks questions. Altered text responds. These are clearly different voices using different methods to appear in the book. The most logical explanation is two different spirits, not one spirit talking to a living person. The question's faded text asks, "Do you remember your name? What do you see? Does he still talk to you?" Sound like someone trying to help another spirit recover memory and identity. The response's altered text provides, "I can't see. I'm scared. It was for me." Sound like a confused, damaged spirit struggling to answer. The entire exchange reads as one spirit reaching out to help another spirit trapped with them, a guardian trying to assist someone who's lost and frightened. If this conversation is between Cassidy and the crying child, both inhabiting Golden Freddy, it explains both the existence of the conversation and its specific content perfectly. The altered text response, "I can't see," is particularly significant. This matches the crying child's situation precisely. His head was crushed in the bite of 83, his skull fractured, his eyes presumably destroyed or damaged. If he possesses Golden Freddy, he would be blind, unable to see through the animatronic's eyes, trapped in darkness or limited perception. This detail is oddly specific and wouldn't make sense as Michael Afton responding to Cassidy, since Michael's visual perception, despite being an undead creature, appears functional throughout Sister Location and FFPS. But it makes perfect sense if the crying child is responding, explaining his limitation, answering truthfully about his inability to perceive visually. This one detail, this response about blindness, strongly points toward dual possession as the correct interpretation. FNAF 4's entire structure connects the crying child to Fredbear Golden Freddy in ways too numerous to ignore. The crying child dies in Fredbear's jaws. Fredbear appears throughout his story as both animatronic and plush. Nightmare Fredbear is the primary antagonist of FNAF 4's gameplay. The promise to put him back together suggests his death isn't the end, that something beyond death awaits. FNAF World's focus on collecting pieces and putting him back together references the crying child specifically, showing a journey toward the Happiest Day minigame, where a child dons the Golden Freddy mask. All of this creates a clear narrative thread connecting the crying child to Golden Freddy. To accept the one soul theory, you must argue all these connections are coincidental or misleading, that despite everything linking the crying child to the Golden Bear, he actually doesn't possess it. That's a lot of evidence to dismiss. The crying child possessing Golden Freddy doesn't contradict the missing children incident if we accept that he arrived first. In 1983, when the bite killed him, his spirit bound to Fredbear, possibly with William or Charlotte's help, fulfilling the promise to put him back together. The suit sat essentially inactive for 2 years. Then in 1985, when Cassidy was murdered and stuffed into that same Golden Freddy suit, her spirit joined the crying child's already present possession, creating the dual possession situation. This timeline works. It explains why Golden Freddy seems different from other animatronics. He is different. He wasn't freshly possessed during the MCI. He was already haunted, and the MCI added a second spirit to existing possession, rather than initiating possession from scratch. This unique history would explain Golden Freddy's unique properties, his spectral nature, his ability to appear and disappear, his behavior that doesn't match the other animatronics. Ultimate Custom Night's ambiguities make more sense with dual possession. The voice casting requested gender ambiguity because 2 spirits are present, one male and one female, making the one you should not have killed simultaneously refer to both. The male pronouns from Withered Chica and Mangle might reference the crying child specifically, while the vengeful spirit's overall presence is primarily Cassidy. The twitching Golden Freddy in the final cutscene represents internal conflict between 2 souls, one wanting to maintain vengeance, the other wanting to rest. The Old Man Consequences minigame tells them both to rest your own soul, plural you implied, asking them to release each other and move on. All these details that seem contradictory or confusing under single possession make perfect sense if we accept Golden Freddy is possessed by 2 spirits with different perspectives and goals. The Week Before, one of the most recent novels in the FNAF series, contains scenes that some interpret as implying Golden Freddy has multiple occupants. When the protagonist listens to a recording of the bite of 83, he continues hearing crying after the recording ends, which could suggest the crying child's spirit lingers near that memory. Golden Freddy then appears, which theorists have interpreted as directly linking the crying child to Golden Freddy. Later, characters experience what could be read as two distinct voices in their mind while interacting with Golden Freddy, one attempting torture, another offering comfort. Fans who support the two-soul theory view this duality of purpose, these competing impulses within one entity, as evidence of two consciousnesses operating through Golden Freddy, both affecting those they encounter. As one of the most recent pieces of FNAF media, The Week Before carries significant weight in debates about Golden Freddy's nature, with interpretations of its scenes often cited by those who believe in multiple souls. The phrase, "it's me," gains additional meaning if both Cassidy and the crying child are present in Golden Freddy. When Michael encounters Golden Freddy in FNAF 1, seeing "it's me" plastered around the office, both spirits could be trying to identify themselves. Cassidy saying, "It's me, one of the children your father murdered." The crying child saying, "It's me, your brother you killed." Both messages are valid. Both spirits have reason to want Michael to recognize them, to understand who he's facing. The doubled meaning, the dual identification, makes "it's me" more potent than if it's just one spirit's message. It becomes a chorus of victims, family, and strangers alike, confronting Michael with the consequences of often family actions. Thematically, the dual soul theory creates a richer narrative. It makes Golden Freddy fundamentally different from the other animatronics, not just in appearance, but in nature. He's the only one possessed by two souls, the only one representing multiple tragedies, the only one where murdered child and accident victim unite in one vessel. This uniqueness explains why Golden Freddy is FNAF's most mysterious animatronic, why his behavior defies easy categorization, why he plays such a central role despite technically being a side character. He's not just another possessed suit. He's a union of two separate victim types, two different Afton family tragedies, bound together in golden metal as the ultimate symbol of how William and Michael's actions destroyed innocent lives. This thematic richness justifies the complexity dual possession introduces. Proponents of Golden Duo often argue that the one-soul theory requires ignoring too much evidence. You have to dismiss the Stitchwraith parallel as irrelevant, despite Fazbear Fright's stated purpose of filling in blanks. You have to reinterpret the Survival Logbook conversation as between Cassidy and Michael, instead of between two Golden Freddy spirits, despite the natural readings suggesting otherwise. You have to explain away all of FNAF 4's connections between the crying child and Golden Freddy as misdirection. You have to ignore the Week Before's implications of multiplicity within Golden Freddy. That's a lot of evidence to set aside in favor of the simpler one-soul reading. Sometimes the correct answer isn't the simplest one. Sometimes complexity exists because the truth actually is complex. The two souls theory doesn't overcomplicate matters. It accounts for evidence that the one soul theory struggles to address. The greatest strength of the two souls theory is how it unifies disparate pieces of evidence into a coherent whole. Evidence about Cassidy fits because she does possess Golden Freddy. Evidence about the crying child fits because he also possesses Golden Freddy. The Stitchwraith exists to show dual possession is possible. The Survival Logbook shows them communicating. Ultimate Custom Night shows them working together, conflicting with each other, struggling toward resolution. Happiest Day attempts to release both, but only partially succeeds. The Week Before confirms their shared presence. Every piece of evidence that seems contradictory or confusing under single possession makes sense when you accept that Golden Freddy is unique, that he alone among the animatronics houses Two souls, two victims, two stories intertwined in one tragic, vengeful, ultimately sympathetic golden form. While Cassidy and the crying child dominate the debate over Golden Freddy's identity, they're not the only candidates proposed over the years. Alternative theories, some with substantial support, others more speculative, offer different answers to who haunts that golden suit. Examining these theories helps us understand the full range of interpretations the community has developed, even if many have fallen out of favor as new evidence emerged. Andrew, from Fazbear Frights, the man in room 1280, represents a compelling alternative candidate, particularly for explaining the one you should not have killed in Ultimate Custom Night. In his story, Andrew keeps William Afton trapped between life and death, refusing to let him die, torturing him through forced consciousness in a horrifically burned body. This role mirrors the vengeful spirit's role in Ultimate Custom Night perfectly. Andrew is explicitly male, matching the male pronouns used by Withered Chica and Mangle in UCN. He appears wearing an alligator mask as a ghost, connecting to the animal masks worn by children in various FNAF minigames. If we accept Fazbear Frights as providing direct answers rather than just parallels, Andrew might be the game's vengeful spirit. But this creates new questions. Did Andrew replace Cassidy in game continuity, meaning Cassidy doesn't possess Golden Freddy at all? Are Andrew and Cassidy the same character with different names in different continuities, like Michael Brooks in the novel trilogy? Or is Andrew a sixth victim beyond the 5 missing children incident kids, murdered separately, possessing Golden Freddy in the games, just as he possessed Afton in the books? This last interpretation could support a two souls theory, with Andrew and Cassidy both in Golden Freddy, or even a three souls theory if you include the crying child as well. Andrew's presence in Fazbear Frights is significant, but his exact relationship to game continuity remains unclear enough that most theorists treat him as a parallel character explaining mechanics, rather than a literal game character replacing Cassidy. Kelsey from Fazbear Frights, The New Kid, presents another book-based alternative. In that story, Kelsey befriends the protagonist and leads him to an abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, where they find a damaged Golden Freddy suit. Kelsey convinces the protagonist to climb inside it for fun, then triggers the spring locks, crushing him inside. The protagonist survives and later realizes Kelsey never existed, or was a ghost, or was the Golden Freddy suit itself luring victims. This story spawned theories that Kelsey might be a game character, a boy possessing Golden Freddy, distinct from both Cassidy and the crying child. Kelsey's role as a deceiver, someone who lures victims to harm, could explain some of Golden Freddy's more malicious behaviors. But like Andrew, Kelsey lacks direct game evidence. He exists only in Fazbear Frights, making him more useful as a parallel for understanding possession mechanics than as a literal game character. The sixth victim theory proposes that the missing children incident actually involves 6 murders, not 5, with 1 victim left unaccounted for in the classic animatronics. Evidence for this comes from several sources. Into the Pit's recreation of the MCI shows 6 children being killed. The Collect the Hats minigame in that game includes a secret 6-party hat beyond the 5 obvious ones. Toy Chica's High School Years, an anime cutscene series in Ultimate Custom Night, shows Toy Chica disposing of 7 victims, potentially representing William Afton's murders. Charlotte, plus 5 MCI kids, plus 1 unknown. If a 6th child was murdered during the incident, they might possess Golden Freddy. explaining why that animatronic seems separate from the core 5, while still being part of the MCI. This theory usually identifies the 6th victim as the crying child, not adding him as a post-MCI possession, but retroactively making him one of the MCI victims, killed alongside the others, rather than 2 years earlier in a separate incident. This reading requires rejecting or reinterpreting FNAF 4's timeline, but it offers a clean explanation for why 6 spirits appear in Happiest Day, despite only 5 confirmed MCI victims. Shadow Freddy theories propose that the crying child possesses not Golden Freddy, but Shadow Freddy, the dark purple or black Freddy-shaped entity that appears in FNAF 2 and 3. Shadow Freddy's behaviors differ from standard animatronics. He causes crashes, appears in unusual locations, seems more like a glitch or ghost than a possessed suit. If the crying child died in Fredbear but couldn't fully possess that suit, perhaps his spirit manifested as Shadow Freddy instead, a dark reflection of the Golden Bear, connected to it but separate. This would explain Shadow Freddy's existence, give the crying child a vessel, and preserve the one soul per animatronic rule for Golden Freddy. The primary weakness of this theory is lack of explicit evidence connecting the crying child to Shadow Freddy. The connection is logical but speculative, based more on this would solve problems than this is clearly indicated by canon. Phone Guy possessing Golden Freddy is an older theory from early FNAF, one days that some fans still discuss. Phone Guy's death call in FNAF 1 features Golden Freddy's distinctive scream, suggesting Golden Freddy killed him. If Phone Guy was stuffed into a suit after death, and that suit was Golden Freddy, he might be the possessing spirit. This theory emerged before later games provided the missing children incident details and Cassidy's name, built primarily on the Scream audio and the question of what happened to Phone Guy's body. Most fans abandoned this theory as more evidence emerged pointing toward child victims, but it represents an interesting early interpretation of Golden Freddy's mysterious nature. The "no one possesses Golden Freddy" theory treats him as fundamentally different from other animatronics. Perhaps Golden Freddy isn't possessed at all in the traditional sense. Perhaps he's a manifestation of collective agony, a psychic impression created by trauma and death saturating Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations, given shape by children's memories of Fredbear. Perhaps he's what's called a shadow animatronic, an entity that exists on a different level than standard possessed suits, closer to pure spiritual energy than machine containing soul. This interpretation explains Golden Freddy's unique behaviors, his ability to teleport, his game-crashing presence, his spectral appearance. He doesn't follow normal rules because he isn't a normal possession. He's something else, something weirder, something the lore hasn't fully explained yet. This theory is deliberately speculative, embracing mystery rather than demanding concrete answers. Michael Afton possessing Golden Freddy is another minority theory usually connected to the Mike victim interpretation. If Michael Afton and the crying child are the same person, if Michael is the crying child's actual name, then Michael's story involves being bitten by Fredbear, dying, and presumably possessing that animatronic. The older brother we see in FNAF 4's minigames would be someone else entirely, perhaps Michael's bully, who later took his name out of guilt. This theory requires accepting Mike victim, which has fallen out of favor as evidence has mounted for Mike Bro. But it offers a unified explanation for several mysteries, connecting Michael's later role in the series back to FNAF 4's tragedy in a direct way. Most theorists reject this now, but it represents creative attempts to make sense of the limited information available in earlier games. The Fredbear is not Golden Freddy theory argues that Fredbear and Golden Freddy are separate characters, separate animatronics, despite looking similar. Fredbear was the original Springlock suit at Fredbear's family diner. Golden Freddy is a later suit, perhaps a backup or replacement, perhaps made after Fredbear was decommissioned following the Bite of '83. If they're separate, the crying child could possess Fredbear specifically, while Cassidy possesses Golden Freddy specifically, solving the timeline problem of how one suit could be possessed in '83 and then again in '85. They're different suits, so different possession events don't create conflict. This theory has textual support, as some games treat Fredbear and Golden Freddy as separate entities, but most fans believe they're the same character, or at least treated as equivalent for lore purposes. These alternative theories demonstrate the creativity and thoroughness of FNAF's community. When faced with ambiguous evidence, theorists explore every possibility, building elaborate explanations from tiny details. Some alternative theories fade as new games provide clarifying information. Others persist in corners of the community, defended by fans who find them more satisfying than mainstream interpretations. The existence of so many theories, so many different answers to who possesses Golden Freddy, reflects both FNAF's deliberate ambiguity and the community's determination to solve every mystery, to find the truth hiding within minigames and source code and novel parallels. Even if most fans now accept that some combination of Cassidy, the crying child, or both possess Golden Freddy, the journey taken to reach that conclusion involved examining and often rejecting dozens of alternative explanations. Understanding these alternatives helps us appreciate why the question remains so difficult, why confident assertions about Golden Freddy's identity should be tempered with humility about what we truly know versus what we've merely concluded seems most likely. After examining evidence from every angle, analyzing arguments supporting both one soul and two souls, exploring alternative theories and canonical ambiguities, we arrive at a crucial question. Why hasn't this mystery been definitively solved? Why, more than 10 years after Golden Freddy first appeared, after dozens of games and books and additional media, does the community remain divided on his identity? The answer reveals something fundamental about Five Nights at Freddy's as a storytelling project and Scott Cawthon's approach to lore building. Scott Cawthon has demonstrated repeatedly that he values ambiguity. He creates stories where multiple interpretations can coexist, where evidence supports competing theories, where certainty remains elusive. This isn't accidental or lazy writing. It's an intentional narrative choice, a specific way of engaging with audiences that treats interpretation itself as part of the experience. FNAF isn't just about discovering truth. It's about the journey of investigation, the debate between theorists, the process of weighing evidence and making judgments with incomplete information. Golden Freddy's ambiguous identity serves this purpose perfectly. The mystery generates discussion. It keeps the community engaged. It ensures that players continue analyzing, debating, theorizing years after they first encountered the character. Some might argue this approach is frustrating, that mysteries should eventually receive clear answers, that ambiguity for its own sake cheapens narrative stakes. There's validity to this criticism. Perpetual mystery can feel like a cop-out, like the creator refusing to commit to their own story's implications. But there's also something valuable about stories that trust audiences to interpret, that provide evidence and let viewers decide what they believe rather than handing them definitive truth. FNAF operates more like a myth or legend than a traditional plot-driven narrative. Myths have variations. Different storytellers emphasize different aspects. Details shift between tellings. What matters isn't factual accuracy, but thematic resonance, emotional truth, the ability of the story to mean something to its audience. Golden Freddy can be both one soul and two souls, depending on which interpretation you find more meaningful, more satisfying, more true to your understanding of what FNAF is about. Scott's statements about Fazbear Fright's filling in blanks exemplify this approach. He didn't say the books provide answers. He said they help fill in blanks, which is deliberately vague. Fill in could mean directly answering questions, or it could mean providing context that helps you form your own answers, or it could mean offering parallel scenarios that illuminate without dictating. This vagueness is a feature, not a bug. It preserves interpretive space. It allows the Stitchwraith to inform our understanding of Golden Freddy without requiring us to accept a specific conclusion about whether dual possession happens in the games. Different fans will weigh that parallel differently, and that's okay. That's the point. The technical challenges of definitively proving either theory also matter. What would constitute absolute proof that Golden Freddy is possessed by one soul versus two? We'd need either explicit statement from a character we trust, impossible given FNAF's limited dialogue and unreliable narrators, or mechanical demonstration that separates spirits visually or functionally, showing us one versus two entities in ways that can't be interpreted differently. Neither seems likely to happen. FNAF's storytelling methods, minimal dialogue, environmental narrative, minigame metaphors, don't lend themselves to explicit statements about internal states of possession. We see Golden Freddy's external behaviors. We can't peer inside his mechanical skull to count souls. Even the week before's scenes of competing voices in characters' minds leave room for interpretation about whether those represent two spirits or one spirit with conflicted impulses. New releases continue adding evidence without settling debates. Help Wanted 2's memory dolls seem to support one soul by showing one Golden Freddy doll connected to Cassidy. But proponents of two souls argue the dolls represent individual children, not individual possessions. So one doll for Cassidy doesn't preclude the crying child also being present. The week before's multiple voices in Golden Freddy's presence seem to support two souls, but proponents of one soul argue those could represent Cassidy's internal conflict, one personality manifesting different aspects without requiring separate spirits. Each new game, each new book, adds fuel to the fire without definitively extinguishing either interpretation. This pattern suggests Scott either can't or won't provide the clarity needed to end debate, preferring to let the mystery persist. Let theories flourish. Let fans remain divided in their conclusions. There's also the possibility that Scott himself hasn't fully decided. FNAF's lore evolved significantly from its original conception. The first game was meant to be standalone, a simple horror experience without elaborate backstory. When it succeeded, Scott built additional narrative onto that foundation, retconning and expanding, sometimes creating consistency, sometimes generating new contradictions. The Golden Freddy question might be one of those areas where multiple story directions were explored over time, with evidence supporting different interpretations, because different interpretations were valid at different points in the series' development. Scott might look at the accumulated evidence and genuinely not have a single answer in mind, accepting that both one soul and two souls work narratively, both have textual support, Both can coexist as valid readings of his intentionally ambiguous creation. Community division itself has become part of FNAF's identity. Go to any FNAF forum, Discord server, Reddit thread, and you'll find passionate debates about Golden Freddy's identity. Team Cassidy argues with Team Crying Child argues with Team Both. This division creates engagement, builds investment, makes people care deeply about figuring out the truth. If Scott provided definitive answer, half the community would be vindicated, half would be disappointed, but everyone would move on to other questions. The debate itself would end. By keeping the question open, Scott ensures it remains perpetually relevant, perpetually discussed, perpetually driving analysis of new releases. This might sound cynical, like deliberately frustrating fans to maintain engagement, but it's also respect for the community's intelligence and passion, trust that they can handle ambiguity, appreciation for how much joy people derive from theorizing even when, or perhaps especially when, definitive answers remain elusive. The Golden Freddy question also connects to deeper FNAF themes about identity, memory, and persistence beyond death. If two souls share Golden Freddy, what does that say about the nature of self? If Cassidy and the Crying Child both inhabit that suit, are they still separate individuals? Or have they merged into something new? Do they retain their own memories? Or do their experiences blend? When Golden Freddy acts, is that one spirit's decision or consensus between two? These philosophical questions don't have neat answers because the situation doesn't have real-world equivalent. We're discussing the mechanics of fictional supernatural possession. Different fans will imagine those mechanics differently, bringing their own intuitions about consciousness, identity, and what it means to be a person. The ambiguity around Golden Freddy's identity creates space for these personal interpretations, makes the question more than just solve the puzzle. It becomes, what do you believe about how souls and identity work? Perhaps the most important reason this mystery remains unsolved is that it doesn't need solving. Golden Freddy works as a character regardless of whether one or two souls haunt him. His role in the narrative, mysterious antagonist, vengeful spirit, symbol of tragedy, remains powerful under either interpretation. The stories we tell with Golden Freddy about the cost of violence, about children whose deaths demand justice, about spirits refusing to rest until wrongs are addressed. Those stories work whether Cassidy acts alone or in concert with the Crying Child. The question matters to theorists, to people who love analyzing lore and debating details, but to casual fans, to people experiencing FNAF's horror without diving deep into timeline analysis, Golden Freddy's ambiguous identity is part of his appeal. He's mysterious. He's strange. He's different from other animatronics. That's enough. The mystery enhances rather than detracts from his effectiveness as a horror icon and narrative symbol. So why doesn't Golden Freddy's identity have a definitive answer? Because Scott Cawthon chose to leave it ambiguous. Because the evidence supports multiple interpretations. Because the community enjoys debating the question. Because new releases continue adding complexity without removing ambiguity. Because philosophy of identity and consciousness doesn't have neat answers to apply to fictional ghost mechanics. Because the mystery itself has become as important as any potential solution. And because ultimately, Golden Freddy works as a character and story element, regardless of whether one soul or two haunt that spectral golden form. The question remains open by design, a perpetual invitation to theorize, to debate, to engage with FNAF's lore as an active participant rather than passive consumer. Whether you find this approach frustrating or fascinating probably depends on what you want from stories. But either way, it's core to understanding why, after a decade of games and evidence, we still can't say with complete confidence who haunts Golden Freddy's suit. As we reach the end of this deep exploration into Golden Freddy's identity, we find ourselves not with a definitive answer, but with a comprehensive understanding of the question itself and why it matters. We've examined the evidence for Cassidy, whose name was revealed through elaborate puzzle solving, whose role as the vengeful spirit in Ultimate Custom Night seems central to FNAF's resolution, whose connection to Golden Freddy is supported by multiple canonical sources. We've explored the crying child, the boy whose death in Fredbear's jaws began the entire tragedy, whose story throughout FNAF 4 ties him inexorably to the Golden Bear, whose fate remains ambiguous enough to support his continued presence beyond death. We've analyzed the Survival Logbook's cryptic conversation, weighing whether it shows two spirits in Golden Freddy or something else entirely. We've examined Ultimate Custom Night's ambiguities, the gender confusion, the pronoun contradictions, the twitching Golden Freddy in the final cutscene, trying to understand what Scott Cawthon intended us to conclude. We've looked at the Stitchwraith from Fazbear Frights, two boys sharing one animatronic body, demonstrating that dual possession is possible within FNAF's established mechanics. We've examined Happiest Day, that final ceremony where spirits receive cake and ascend, trying to determine who benefits from that release and what it means for Golden Freddy's ultimate fate. We've weighed evidence supporting one soul, the simplicity and clean narrative of Cassidy alone as the fifth missing children incident victim possessing the fifth animatronic. We've weighed evidence supporting two souls, the Stitchwraith parallel, the logbook conversation, the week before's implications, the thematic richness of Cassidy and the crying child united in tragedy. We've explored alternative theories, from Andrew to Kelsey, to various speculative interpretations that expand the range of possible answers beyond the most common two. What can we say with confidence? Golden Freddy is haunted by at least one spirit, that much is certain. Animatronics in a FNAF are possessed, and Golden Freddy exhibits all the signs of possession, the supernatural behaviors, the apparent consciousness, the reactions suggesting awareness and intent beyond mere programming. We can say with high confidence that Cassidy is connected to Golden Freddy in some fashion. Her name appears in the context of Golden Freddy imagery. She's described in ways that match the child receiving cake in Happiest Day. She plays a central role as the one you should not have killed in Ultimate Custom Night, which heavily features Golden Freddy. Whether she's the only spirit in Golden Freddy remains debatable, but her presence in some capacity has substantial evidence supporting it. We can say the crying child died in circumstances that could enable possession, that his fate remains ambiguous, that evidence connects him to Golden Freddy without definitively proving he possesses it. We can say dual possession is possible in FNAF's universe, demonstrated by the Stitchwraith, meaning the two souls theory isn't mechanically impossible, even if it remains unconfirmed. Beyond these confident statements, we enter speculation, interpretation, personal judgment about which evidence matters most. If you prioritize the missing children incident's 5 victims corresponding to 5 animatronics, Cassidy alone makes sense. If you prioritize FNAF 4's narrative and the crying child's unresolved fate, dual possession becomes necessary. If you weight Fazbear Frights heavily, the Stitchwraith parallel almost demands accepting that Golden Freddy is possessed by 2 souls. If you dismiss the books as separate continuity, That parallel means nothing. If you accept the week before as the most current and therefore most authoritative source, its implications of multiple voices within Golden Freddy support dual possession. If you view Help Wanted 2's single memory doll as definitive, that supports one soul. Every choice about which sources to trust, which evidence to prioritize, which interpretations to accept, shapes your conclusion. This is the beauty and frustration of FNAF's storytelling approach. You're not told what to think. You're given evidence and asked to form conclusions. Different fans, analyzing the same information, reach different answers. Neither side is stupid or missing obvious clues. They're making different but equally valid interpretive choices about ambiguous evidence. The Golden Freddy question has become a litmus test for how you approach FNAF lore generally. Are you a minimalist who accepts only explicit statements and rejects speculation? You probably believe in one soul. Are you someone who draws connections between different media, who weights parallels and metaphors heavily? You probably believe in two souls. Are you comfortable with ambiguity, accepting that some questions might not have answers? You might not commit to either position, content with, "We can't know for sure." What makes Golden Freddy such a compelling character, regardless of who possesses him, is how much he represents about FNAF's core themes. He's a victim, or multiple victims, trapped in metal and wire, unable to rest, seeking something, whether that's justice, vengeance, peace, or simply acknowledgement of their suffering. He's a reminder that violence has lasting consequences, that William Afton's crimes echoed through time, creating ripples of pain that wouldn't settle until properly addressed. He's proof that some spirits won't go quietly, won't accept that their killers might escape punishment, won't stop fighting until wrongs are made right, or at least made visible. Whether one child or two children haunt Golden Freddy, those themes remain powerful. The question of his identity is endlessly fascinating to theorists, but ultimately secondary to what he represents narratively, a force of consequence, a ghost that demands accounting. As new FNAF games and media continue releasing, we'll likely receive additional evidence about Golden Freddy. Perhaps future installments will clarify whether he's possessed by one soul or two. Perhaps the ambiguity will persist forever, each new game adding details that support both interpretations equally. Perhaps Scott Cawthon will eventually make a direct statement, confirming one theory and ending debate. Or perhaps, true to his approach throughout the series, he'll leave the question eternally open, trusting fans to debate and decide for themselves, accepting that multiple valid interpretations can coexist within a deliberately ambiguous narrative structure. We won't presume to know which path future FNAF stories will take. We can only examine the evidence available now and acknowledge both its richness and its gaps. If you've made it this far, through tens of thousands of words exploring every angle of this question, you've demonstrated remarkable dedication to understanding one of gaming's most persistent mysteries. Whether you started this journey believing in one soul, two souls, or uncertain about either position, hopefully you now have a comprehensive understanding of the evidence supporting all perspectives. Hopefully you can see why different fans reach different conclusions, why this debate continues after so many years, why Golden Freddy's identity remains Five Nights at Freddy's most beautifully frustrating unsolved mystery. The question may never have a definitive answer, but the journey of exploring it, weighing evidence, forming conclusions, that journey is valuable in itself. It's what keeps FNAF's community alive, engaged, passionate about understanding a story that refuses to be fully understood. Before we close, if you enjoyed this deep dive into Golden Freddy's identity and found value in this comprehensive examination of both theories, please consider leaving a like on this video and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. We create detailed, thorough explorations of FNAF lore designed for people who want to understand these mysteries completely, who appreciate when every angle gets examined rather than being told what to think. Let me know in the comments which theory you support. Are you Team Cassidy alone, Team Golden Duo with both spirits, or Team still undecided? It's always fascinating to see how the community breaks down on this question, how different people weigh the evidence differently, and if there are other FNAF mysteries you'd like explored with this level of detail. Drop suggestions in the comments. There are so many questions in this franchise worth examining thoroughly. So many debates that deserve comprehensive analysis rather than surface-level takes. For now, though, rest well. Let these questions and evidence pieces drift through your mind as you settle into sleep. Whether one soul or two haunt Golden Freddy, whether Cassidy stands alone or shares space with the crying child, whether the truth is something we've considered or something we haven't even imagined yet, the mystery endures. It reminds us that not all questions have easy answers, that some stories are meant to be debated rather than definitively solved, that sometimes the journey of investigation matters more than the destination of certainty. Golden Freddy remains Five Nights at Freddy's greatest enigma, a character defined as much by what we don't know as by what we do. And perhaps that's exactly how it should be. Good night, and remember, even in the darkest mysteries, there's beauty in the search for truth, even when truth remains tantalizingly out of reach.